Hi, I'm Sarah Tantillo. I'm the Managing Director of Humanities at Great Oaks Legacy Charter Schools Network. I'm excited to talk with you today about how we teach vocabulary. So let me share my screen so we can get right into it. Here we go. All right. So I'm going to cover 5 things today. What do we do when students ask, what does that word mean? How do we select the words? How do we introduce them? How do we review them? And how do we assess them? So let's get right to it. Pretty often when you're teaching, students will raise a hand and say, hey, what does that word mean? There are a variety of things you can do, not necessarily in this order, depending on the situation. But instead of saying, look it up, one thing you should do is ask them if they see any context clues. Another thing is to ask them if they recognize any familiar word parts or roots. And then a really important thing you can do is to give them a sentence that uses the word with ample context so that they have to figure out what the word means. This is really helpful because the process of inferring what the word means from the context is just enough so that students will have that kind of hook to retain what the word means. You can simply say, here's what that word means, and just give them like a quick and easy definition, especially if you're reading a really dense passage with a lot of vocabulary in it and you don't want to slow down too much, that is a possibility. But if they're just a couple of words that you need students to understand in the course of the text that you're discussing, giving them a sentence with ample context is really probably the best way to go. You can also give them footnotes or a glossary if that's what's going to help them get through a dense piece of text. You don't want to ask them to or direct them to go look it up, especially if you're in a whole class discussion, because that just leads to students getting unplugged and not paying attention while they wait for somebody else to look up a word. And a lot of times when students look up words in the dictionary, they don't understand what the definitions mean. So it's really not a good use of time. Okay. One last thing I want to say about making that sentence with the context clues. This is an important part of the process when you're making your lesson plans, to pre-identify those words that students are most likely not going to understand that you can support them with. So just make a little mental note of that. Okay, now let's move on to routine vocabulary instruction. So let's say you want to teach 5 words in a week, and you're trying to find what 5 words that you want to teach explicitly. And here's what we like to do. We're in ELA class, we're focused on tier 2 words for the most part. Those are words that students they already know the concept, but it's another word for that concept. So maybe they know hardworking, industrious would be a tier 2 word that captures that concept. There are 3 tiers, as explained in the Bringing Words to Life book by Beck, McCowan, and Kukin. Tier 1 is like really basic words like clock, baby, shoes, those kinds of things. Tier 2 is what we're targeting for the most part. That's advanced vocabulary used by adults. And then tier 3 is jargon that's really specific to a particular domain or content area. Please notice that in social studies and science, you tend to teach more tier 3 words inevitably because of the content that you're dealing with. Okay, so you want to try to pick those tier 2 and sometimes tier 3 words. Great, so let's say we have our words now. So, at Great Oaks this year, we are more than likely going to teach 1 or 2 words a day at the beginning of our ELA classes. But what you'll see in front of you now is a 1-pager that has all 5 words in it. And here's how we introduce new vocabulary. We use what we call a hypothesis sheet. And we give the students, first of all, the vocabulary word capitalized in a sentence with robust context. And then they have a minute to try to infer what they think that word means. And then we have a whole class discussion where we get into putting together a user-friendly definition. And then depending on how you want to run things, you can ask students to draft their own sentence using context clues. You can give them a minute or 2 to do that. Um, and ultimately, students should walk away with both a user-friendly definition and a sentence, another sentence that uses the word in context. You may notice as you're looking at this handout that we have the root word that we're defining in uppercase and the ending in lowercase. And the reason for that is just to remind students that when they're creating the user-friendly definition, that they're doing it with the correct part of speech, so there's no confusion. So we're looking at peer, the verb peer, to peer. And if you go down to the next page on your handout, what you will see is we use a consistent way to set up user-friendly definitions. So for verbs, we always start out with the infinitive, to whatever. And for nouns, it's always someone or something that blah, blah, blah. For adjectives, to signal that it's an adjective, we start off with the word describes. Describe someone or something that. Okay, great. So we've introduced the words, and now we want to start to review the words. We have 3 different approaches to reviewing the words. Option 1, and again, not necessarily in this order, but option 1 is to give them sentence stems that they have to finish. So we studied the word vacant, we introduced it already, and now we're going to try to finish this sentence. So if a room is vacant, you can probably finish that sentence and make sure it includes enough context so that you're signaling to us that you know what the word means. So that's option 1. And again, there's not one right answer for filling in the end of a sentence. So this involves some creativity on the part of students. It's important to reinforce that there isn't one correct answer, so students feel free to give a variety of different thoughts. Option 2, when we're reviewing, is just some quick answers. You set up a table like this where you have different roles, people who have different roles, and you have questions, and what you want the students to do is jot a quick note that answers the question. They don't even have to write complete sentences. This works really well as a do now because it can be done quickly and it's fun to go over because students can make it, they can make it funny while still showing that they understand the word. So you can see here that a baby might gnaw on her fist when teething, a basketball player might gnaw on a towel when he's worried his team will lose, mom might gnaw on some celery when she's on a diet. Not to stereotype, but anyway, just to give some ideas, okay? All right, option 3 is what's called scenarios. And this one is considered to be quiz prep because it's a really good way to also quiz students, as you'll see when we look at the assessment options. So the idea behind the scenarios is that you give students the word and then you give them 2 scenarios and they have to figure out which scenario best matches or is relevant to the word. So for example, in the first one, vacant, scenario 1, there was no room in the parking lot versus the parking lot was empty. So in that one, it's kind of obvious that scenario 2 is best, or better, I should say. Because if there's no room in the parking lot, there is no vacancy. But it's not always going to be the case that one option is absolutely right and one's absolutely wrong. So you should keep that in mind, that as long as students can really coherently explain why they picked the scenario that they did and show that they understood what the word meant, they should get full credit. Okay, so that's scenarios. And it takes some practice. The other reason why we call it quiz prep is because you want to practice this approach in class before you put it on a quiz. You don't want to just start quizzing them on a format they're not familiar with. Now we have a variety of different kinds of quiz questions. One is, of course, the scenarios I was just discussing. Another is giving kind of like situations and getting students to explain them using the vocabulary. Another way is to give them a paragraph in which the paragraph originally had the vocabulary words in it and you took those words out and replaced them with easier words. and it's a good idea to give students a word bank in this case. Another tip is that if you use the website rewordify.com, you put a paragraph or any length text into the rewordify.com website. There's like a little box. It converts it into different words. Usually it simplifies the passage. And so if you have a challenging passage with some of your vocabulary words in it, you put that into Rewordify, it will give you some easier options so that you can convert the text into this format for the quiz. And then there are some additional approaches using context clues to figure out the meaning of the word. Again, it's not just multiple choice, but students have to always explain their rationale. It's really important that you ask students why anytime you're asking them to convey the meaning of the word. Why do you think it means that? How'd you know? To show that they're giving it some thought and they're not just randomly guessing on a multiple choice question. Okay, so that's the approach. If you're interested in looking at more information around vocabulary instruction, you can go to my blog, The Literacy Cookbook, and you can, excuse me, that's my website. You can go to my blog, the Literacy Cookbook blog, and type in vocabulary instruction, and you'll find some more resources there. Also on my website, the Literacy Cookbook website, there's a whole page on vocabulary, a whole website page devoted to building robust vocabulary. And there are a bunch of tools there that you can download. Great. All right. Thank you very much. I'll talk to you soon.